Morning, my nephew's wife showed up at my door with a man I didn't recognize. I was in the middle of rewiring a lamp I'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. She had a smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes, and the man beside her was holding a folder. The thick kind, the kind that means someone spent money on lawyers. My nephew stood at the edge of the driveway, hands in his pockets, not looking at me. I'd spent 31 years as a forensic accountant for the IRS. I know what guilt looks like on a person's face. It looks exactly like that. The man introduced himself as a representative from Meridian Financial Trust. He said there was a matter regarding my late wife's life insurance policy, a policy I'd held for 22 years, one that named me as sole beneficiary. He said the beneficiary designation had been updated 8 months ago. He said the new beneficiary was a limited liability company called Pinnacle Legacy Solutions LLC. He handed me the folder. I took it. I read it slowly, the way I used to read audit files, looking not for what was there, but for what shouldn't be. My nephew's wife was still smiling. I looked up at her and said very quietly, "Who notarized this?" Her smile flickered, just for a second, but I saw it. "My name is Russell Holt. I'm 64 years old, and I spent the better part of 4 decades examining financial documents for a living. Numbers don't lie. People do. I learned to tell the difference somewhere around year 3 on the job, and I never forgot how. My wife Carolyn died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. We had 38 years together, and I won't pretend the last 14 months have been anything other than the longest stretch of my life. We never had children. It was the one grief that lived quietly underneath everything else, never quite healing, never quite leaving. Carolyn's nephew, my nephew by marriage. I'll call him by the name he gave me when I first met him at Carolyn's sister's kitchen table 18 years ago, which was just nephew in every story I told about him, because that's all he ever was to me. His name is Bryce. He was 26 when Carolyn and I took him in after his mother passed. We helped him get back on his feet, co-signed on his first apartment, lent him money twice that was never repaid, and I never kept score because Carolyn loved him and I loved her. He married a woman named Sasha 3 years ago. She had opinions about everything and information about nothing. The kind of person who speaks with absolute confidence and is wrong half the time. I tried to like her. I kept trying right up until the morning. She showed up at my door with that folder. The insurance policy in question was a $2 million term life policy I'd carried on Carolyn. I'd taken it out in 2003 when we refinanced the house and the mortgage broker recommended it. I paid the premiums for 22 years without thinking much about it. When Carolyn got her diagnosis, I pulled all our documents together and reviewed everything. The will, the property deed, the investment accounts, the insurance policies. Everything was in order. Everything named me. I was meticulous about it because that's who I am. Which is why, when I read that folder standing in my own doorway, my first reaction wasn't panic. It was recognition. I knew what I was looking at. I'd seen it before in a different context, in federal audit files. The fingerprints of someone who thought they understood financial documents well enough to manipulate them, but didn't understand them well enough to do it cleanly. The beneficiary change form was dated 11 months ago, 3 months after Carolyn's diagnosis, 5 months before she died. The form bore what was supposed to be my signature. The notarization stamp belonged to a licensed notary in Cobb County, Georgia. The LLC listed as new beneficiary, Pinnacle Legacy Solutions, had been registered in Delaware 7 weeks before the form was filed. I closed the folder. I handed it back to the man from Meridian Financial Trust. "I'll need some time to review this with my attorney," I said. "You'll hear from us." He nodded. He was professional. He was just doing his job. I looked past him at Bryce, who was still standing at the edge of the driveway, still not looking at me. "Bryce," I said. He finally looked up. "Come inside." He shook his head. Sasha touched his arm and said something too quiet for me to hear, and the two of them got in their car and drove away. I closed the door. I stood in my entryway for a long moment, holding very still the way you do when something has broken and you're not sure yet how bad it is. Then I walked to my office, sat down at my desk, and started making a list. I should tell you about the 6 months before that morning because that's where it actually started. Rice began calling more often after Carolyn died. At first, I was grateful. Grief is its own kind of isolation, and I wasn't immune to it. He'd come by on weekends, helped me with things around the house, cleared the gutters once, helped me move some furniture out of Carolyn's sewing room when I finally decided I was ready. Sasha came sometimes too. She'd wander through the house the way people do when they're mentally cataloging things, running her fingers along furniture, asking offhand questions. Is this an antique? What's this piece worth? Did Carolyn have jewelry, or was she more of a minimalist? I noticed the way I notice things. But grief makes you want to believe the best of people. It makes you want to believe that when someone shows up, they're there because they care. Bryce brought paperwork twice. The first time, he said it was about the estate forms related to Carolyn's accounts that needed a signature to close out. I reviewed them. They looked legitimate. The second time, he said it was a standard insurance form, just an update to my contact information on file. He had 3 pages with him. I read the first two carefully. The third, I glanced at. The header said, Policy Contact Verification. I signed at the bottom where he indicated. I've spent 3 decades examining financial fraud. I signed a document I didn't read completely because it was my nephew, and I was 3 months out from burying my wife. That's the thing nobody tells you about grief. It doesn't just hurt. It makes you careless in ways you never would have been otherwise. The morning after Meridian Financial Trust came to my door, I called James Whitfield. James had been my personal attorney for 11 years, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who read footnotes. He'd helped me write our estate plan, and he knew every document related to our finances. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Bring me the folder, he said, and pull every insurance document you have from your own files. We met at his office in Buckhead that afternoon. He put on his reading glasses and went through everything page by page without speaking. I sat across from him and waited, which is something I'm good at. After 20 minutes, he looked up. The signature doesn't match your verified samples in our estate file. I know. The notarization is from a Cobb County notary. Do you know anyone in Cobb County? No. The LLC was formed in Delaware. Delaware LLCs take about a week and can be filed online by anyone. He took off his glasses and set them on the desk. Russell, someone forged your signature on a beneficiary change form, used a fraudulent notarization, and funneled it through a shell company. This is a serious federal matter. I know what it is, I said. What I need to know is how to prove it. James recommended a forensic document examiner named Paul Greer, 26 years in the field, former expert witness in federal fraud cases. He also recommended I contact the insurance company's fraud investigation unit directly rather than waiting for their internal process. I spent the rest of that day on the phone and the next morning driving across Atlanta to Paul Greer's office, which was exactly what a forensic examiner's office looks like. Rows of filing cabinets, a large examination table with a light box, stacks of folders organized with the quiet precision of someone who finds disorder genuinely offensive. I liked him immediately. He took 2 hours with the documents. When he came back to the conference room where I was waiting, he set a printed report on the table between us. Probability of forgery 94%, he said. The pen pressure is wrong. Your authentic signature applies heaviest pressure at the initial downstroke of the R. This signature applies heaviest pressure mid-stroke. That's not a habit you change without noticing. There are also letter spacing inconsistencies in the second syllable of your last name. I picked up the report and read through it carefully. The notarization, I said. That's more interesting. He leaned back. The seal impression is legitimate. It belongs to a licensed notary named Dorothy Fenn in Marietta. But Dorothy Fenn hasn't worked as a notary since March of last year. Her commission expired, and she didn't renew. Someone used her old seal on this document, which means either she still has it and lent it, or it was taken. I drove to Marietta that same afternoon. Dorothy Finn was a retired bank teller in her early 70s who lived in a small house near the Marietta Square. When I showed her the document, she put on her bifocals and studied it for a long time. "This is my seal," she said finally. "But I didn't notarize this. I would never. This isn't anything I saw." She looked up at me. "I gave Bryce a copy of my seal impression years ago when he was helping me digitize some old documents. He said it was just for filing purposes. I trusted him." She'd known Bryce through her daughter, who'd been friends with Sasha in college. Everything connected. I went home and sat in my living room with the lights off for a while. Not out of despair, but because I think better in the quiet and I needed to think. What I knew, Bryce had orchestrated a beneficiary change on a $2 million life insurance policy, forged my signature, used an expired notary seal he'd obtained under false pretenses, and routed the payout to an LLC he almost certainly controlled. He'd planned it during Carolyn's illness, which meant he knew what was coming and started moving before she was even gone. What I didn't know yet, how much else he touched. I pulled out the folder Carolyn and I kept in the fireproof safe in the closet, the one with every financial document we owned. I went through it page by page the way I used to go through audit files, not reading for content but looking for anything that felt wrong. A date that didn't fit, a signature that felt slightly off, a form I didn't remember filling out. I found two things. The first was a change of address form on one of my retirement accounts, redirecting paper statements to a P.O. box I'd never opened, filed 8 months ago. The second was a transfer authorization on a secondary brokerage account, not my primary one, but a smaller account I'd opened years ago and rarely touched, now holding about $140,000. The authorization was for a wire transfer to an account I didn't recognize. The transfer hadn't gone through yet. The authorization was pending. I called the brokerage before they closed. I told them to freeze the account immediately pending a fraud investigation. The representative on the phone was patient and thorough, and the account was frozen within the hour. Then I called James. "There's more," I said. "There usually is," he said. James referred me to a private investigator named Glenn Cozy, former Georgia Bureau of Investigation, now private practice, specializing in financial fraud cases. He was a compact, deliberate man who asked questions the way experienced investigators do, simply and directly, without leading. He listened to everything I told him and took notes in a small spiral notebook. "Tell me about the LLC," he said. "Pinnacle Legacy Solutions." I looked it up. It's a Delaware LLC. No public officers listed, which is standard for Delaware. No website, no address beyond a registered agent in Wilmington. "Standard shell structure," he said. "Easy to form, hard to trace without financial records, but not impossible." He flicked a page in his notebook. "Does your nephew have any legitimate business interests? Anything that would explain a need for a corporate entity?" Bryce worked in residential real estate, not as an agent, but in a support role at a brokerage. He made a comfortable enough salary. He and Sasha lived in a nice apartment in Smyrna. They drove leased vehicles, took 2 vacations a year, kept up appearances. Nothing alarming on the surface, nothing that explained a Delaware LLC or a pending $2 million payout. "How long will it take?" I asked. "Give me a week," Glenn said. He called in 5 days. We met at a coffee shop near his office, and he slid a folder across the table before he said anything. I opened it. "Bryce and Sasha have been living significantly beyond their income for the past 18 months, he said. Credit card debt across 4 cards. Total balance just under $90,000. 2 car leases they're barely servicing. 2 personal loans. And this," he pointed to a page near the back. "Blythe put down a deposit on a property in Lisbon, Portugal 14 months ago. Non-refundable. $18,000. I stared at the page. Portugal, I said. Portugal. The property is a two-bedroom apartment in the Alfama district, listed under Sasha's name. They've made 2 additional payments since the deposit. They've been planning to leave. That was the shape of it. Collect the insurance payout, wire what they could from the brokerage account, pay off enough debt to disappear cleanly, and move to Lisbon. Leave me to fight with an insurance company over a document that looked legitimate on its face, by which time they'd be across the Atlantic. Is there anything else? I asked. Len hesitated. Sasha has a brother named Connor. He works in financial services in Charlotte. I found email correspondence between him and Bryce from about 16 months ago, discussing the beneficiary change strategy in detail. Connor appears to have advised them on the LLC structure and the document process. So Sasha's brother had been the architect, the person who knew enough about financial instruments to tell Bryce how to do it without getting caught, or so they thought. I need everything you have documented, I said. Already printing the full report, he said. James filed the civil lawsuit on a Tuesday morning. We sued Bryce and Sasha jointly for fraud, forgery, and civil conspiracy. We also filed a motion to freeze all assets connected to Pinnacle Legacy Solutions, pending investigation, and a separate filing to invalidate the fraudulent beneficiary change with Meridian Financial Trust. The insurance company's fraud unit had, by that point, already opened their own investigation after receiving Paul Greer's forensic report and Dorothy Fenn's sworn affidavit. The beneficiary change was suspended. No payout would occur until the matter was resolved. The day after we filed, Bryce called me. I answered. He didn't say hello. He just said, "Why are you doing this? We're family." I had thought about what I would say if he called. I'd had time to prepare, the way you prepare for cross-examination. Not scripted, but clear about what you wanted to establish. Family, I said. You planned this during Carolyn's illness. While she was dying, you were setting up an LLC in Delaware and using an old woman's expired notary seal to forge my signature. It wasn't like that. Bryce. I kept my voice flat. I spent 31 years examining financial fraud. This is exactly what it was like. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Sasha said you'd never figure it out. She said you were too old and too belief-stricken to catch it. That stung, the way truth stings when it's been wielded as a weapon. Tell Sasha she was almost right, I said, almost. I ended the call. The civil hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Glenn Cozy had forwarded his complete findings, including the emails involving Connor, Sasha's brother, to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Insurance fraud across state lines is a federal matter. The Delaware LLC structure crossed at least 3 jurisdictions. 2 weeks before the hearing, federal agents visited Connor at his office in Charlotte. He cooperated. That's what James told me when he called with the update, and I noticed he said it without editorializing, just as a fact. Connor cooperated, provided records, and his cooperation confirmed what Glenn had already documented, that he'd designed the LLC structure specifically to receive fraudulent insurance proceeds, that he'd advised Bryce on the signature process, that he'd known from the beginning what the money was. Cooperation has a cost, though. It doesn't erase involvement, it just changes the sentence. The morning of the hearing, I wore the suit I'd worn to Carolyn's memorial service. I know that sounds strange, but it felt right. That suit had already held me through the hardest day of my life. It could hold me through this one too. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. A civil proceeding, not a criminal trial, though the criminal referral was already moving through federal channels. Bryce and Sasha sat at the defendant's table with an attorney I recognized by reputation, a man named Edward who handled civil fraud cases in Atlanta. He was competent but not brilliant, which told me Bryce had chosen him by price, not by quality. Sasha didn't look at me when I walked in. Bryce did. I held his gaze for a moment, then sat down. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. Paul Greer's forensic report, Dorothy Fenn's affidavit, Glenn Cozy's financial investigation, the email correspondence involving Connor, the Lisbon property deposit under Sasha's name, The pending brokerage wire transfer that never completed because I'd frozen the account. Edward made his argument that Bryce had believed he was acting in the spirit of Carolyn's wishes, that there had been conversations about estate planning that Bryce had misunderstood, that the documents had been prepared by a third party and Bryce had signed in good faith. The judge let him finish. Then she looked at him over her reading glasses and said, "Counsel, the email correspondence submitted by the plaintiff includes a message from your client to his brother-in-law dated 14 months ago that reads, in part, once we have the LFC in place, we just need his signature and nobody will question it. Does that sound like a good faith misunderstanding to you?" Edward had no answer that helped him. The ruling came down before noon. The fraudulent beneficiary change was voided. The original policy beneficiary, me, was reinstated. All assets connected to Pinnacle Legacy Solutions were frozen pending the federal investigation. Rice and Sasha were ordered to pay legal fees and damages. As they were leaving the courtroom, Bryce stopped beside me. Sasha kept walking. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. 18 years. He'd sat at our Thanksgiving table. Carolyn had taught him how to make her cornbread dressing, because he asked her to. She'd been proud of him, genuinely proud, in the uncomplicated way she had of caring about people. "I know," I said, and I meant it. Not that it changed anything, but I believed he meant it, at least in that moment, standing in the aftermath of something he couldn't undo. I walked out into the Atlanta sun. The federal case moved faster than I expected. Rice pleaded guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Sentencing came 4 months after the civil ruling. He received 30 months in federal prison, plus restitution, plus 5 years of supervised release. Sasha was charged as a co-conspirator. She fought it. Her attorney argued she'd been influenced by Bryce, that she'd been a secondary participant. The jury disagreed. She received 18 months with eligibility for early release after 12. Connor, in Charlotte, lost his securities license as part of his cooperation agreement and paid a civil penalty of $40,000. He kept his freedom. I'm not sure that was entirely just, but I also know that without his cooperation, the federal case might have taken years instead of months. The Lisbon apartment was seized as part of the restitution order. I don't know what happened to it after that. I didn't ask. A few weeks after sentencing, I finished the lamp I'd been rewiring the morning all of this started. I set it on the table in the living room, where Carolyn used to read in the evenings. The light is warm and steady, the kind of light she would have liked. I've thought about whether I could have caught it sooner, whether I should have read that third page more carefully, regardless of who was asking me to sign it. The honest answer is yes. Grief had made me careless in a way that expertise couldn't fully compensate for, and a man who should have known better gave his nephew an opening he never should have had. I don't say that to be hard on myself. I say it because it's true, and I'd spent my career believing that accurate accounting, even of your own failures, is the only foundation worth building on. I got a card from Dorothy Fenn, the retired notary in Marietta, about a month after the sentencing. She apologized again for what her seal had been used for. She said she hoped I was doing all right. She said she still thought about Carolyn, whom she'd never met, because she'd heard enough about her to feel like she had. I wrote back. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that the only people responsible for what happened were the ones who chose to do it. I meant that. Some things you can recover from cleanly. The money is protected. The policy stands. My name is back where it belongs on documents I own. Some things you can't recover from completely. Bryce isn't who I thought he was, and there's no legal ruling that changes that. He was family, all I thought he was, and that particular grief doesn't have a resolution date. I've been spending more time in the garden lately. Carolyn always kept it better than I did, and it showed after she was gone. Things overgrown that shouldn't be, things wilted that needed attention. I've been learning, slowly, making mistakes and correcting them. That's mostly what getting older looks like, I think. Not wisdom exactly, just the willingness to keep doing the work, even after you've been reminded, in the sharpest possible terms, that you are not beyond being fooled. The lamp glows. The garden is coming back. That's enough for now. There's a lamp in my living room now that I rewired with my own hands. It sits on the table where Carolyn used to read in the evenings. I finished it the same week the sentencing came down, and I turned it on and stood there for a minute looking at it. And what I felt wasn't triumph. It was something quieter than that, something closer to relief that the light still worked. I've thought a lot about what made any of this possible. Not the outcome, but the unraveling. What allowed Bryce and Sasha to get as far as they did? The honest answer is that I gave it to them. Not the money, not the policy. I gave them my carelessness. I signed a document I didn't finish reading because I was grieving and because he was family, and because some part of me had decided that trusting someone meant not checking their work. That was wrong. It cost me months of legal proceedings and a relationship I'll never fully recover. What it didn't cost me was everything. And the reason it didn't is that I'd spent 31 years building something they couldn't fake. The ability to look at a document and know when something is wrong. That knowledge didn't come from talent. It came from showing up, year after year, to work that required precision, even when precision was inconvenient. There's no shortcut to that kind of competence. Bryce and Sasha found that out the hard way. Connor, Sasha's brother in Charlotte, found it out too, that understanding financial structures well enough to build a scheme doesn't mean you understand them well enough to make the scheme invisible to someone who does this for a living. What I keep coming back to is the sequence of it. They started planning while Carolyn was still alive, while she was going through treatment, while I was driving her to appointments and sitting in waiting rooms and trying to figure out how to cook the things she could still eat. Bryce was on the phone with Connor, working out the LLC structure. That's the part I can't make peace with, and I've stopped trying. Some things don't deserve peace. They deserve to be looked at clearly, without softening, for what they actually were. But here's what's also true. The same discipline that let me catch the forgery is the same discipline that keeps me from being consumed by the anger. I learned a long time ago that the most useful thing you can do with a hard truth is account for it accurately and then decide what to do next. Not minimize it, not catastrophize it. Just see it exactly as it is and keep moving forward. Bryce made his choices. The legal system processed those choices. I'm still here, in my house, with the lamp on. What I'd want anyone to take from this, and I mean anyone, not just people who've been defrauded, but anyone who's watching this from wherever you are, is that the qualities that actually protect you in this life aren't dramatic. They're not revenge fantasies or confrontations. They're the slow-built things. The honesty to admit when you made a mistake, the competence to understand what you're dealing with, and the steadiness to keep working when everything has gotten hard and you're tired and you'd rather just let someone else handle it. Those things take years to build. They can't be faked, and as it turns out, they can't be stolen either. The garden is coming back, slowly the way things do when you give them consistent attention instead of just hoping for the best. That's how most things worth having come back.